We will start with a roll call vote on the county side. Jeff Barth,
Present.
Adam Morehauser,
Present.
Doug Odie,
Here.
Mike Ralston,
Here.
Becky Randall, Bonnie Duffy. I also need a roll call vote for Dell Rapids.
Chairman Deerda? Klein? Here. Huff? Here. Ludens? Here. Schwebach? Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Also, make sure when you're making a motion or a second, you state who you are, please. Good evening. I call to order this regular joint meeting of the Minnehaha County and Dell Rapids Board of Adjustments. And I will begin with a few introductory comments. As a courtesy to everyone here tonight, please make sure that all cell phones are turned off. The two boards work together as the Joint Zoning Board of Adjustments to consider variance applications and administrative appeals within the rural area surrounding the city. The area is displayed on the screen. In observance of the CDC guidelines for social distancing, tonight's meeting is taking place simultaneously within the County Commission meeting room and virtually within a Zoom meeting room online. In the Zoom meeting room, each individual user on the line will be on mute to maintain communication clarity for everyone. Every item listed on the agenda will be read separately. If any member of the public wishes to be heard on any item, you may raise your hand while I read the item description. If hands are raised, we will follow our normal hearing procedure by requesting planning staff to present a report on each item, and they request the petitioner to come to the podium and make a statement or answer any questions. Anyone from the audience wishing to address the item shall be recognized by planning staff in the order hands were raised and state their name and address for the record. The Board of Adjustment will then discuss the matter and take appropriate action. Actions taken by the Board of Adjustment are considered as final. Actions taken on a variance requires 2/3 majority of all members of each board for approval. This means 5 commissioners from the county and 4 commissioners from the city must approve the item for the item to be approved. First on the agenda is public input. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda?
No hands are raised.
Thanks, David. Next, we will consider item number 1 in its variance 21-01 to reduce the required front yard setback from 50 feet to 23 feet for a new structure on the property legally described as the north half, the north half, the northeast quarter. There is an exception, H-1 and H-3, end of exception in section 131, Township 104 North, Range 50 West. Petitioner is Todd Brown. He's also the property owner. He's about 2.5 miles west of Dell Rapids. Scott?
Thank you. Scott Anderson, Planning Director, and I'll be presenting the variance request. The applicant, as you indicated, is Todd Brown, and this is relatively familiar to most people. It's at the interchange of County Highway 104, and which is 246th Street, and Interstate 29. It's in the southwest quadrant of that intersection. The applicant is requesting to build a 80 by 140 foot building, and I apologize for that because in your staff report it says 120, but it was a typo. It is it's a 80 by 140 foot building. The setback for this property is 50 feet from the property line because it is on an arterial street, and the applicant would like to reduce that setback from 50 feet to 23 feet. If you're familiar with this, and as you see on the site plan, there is already a couple of buildings that are closer than 50 feet, and I have indicated that one of them probably predates the zoning ordinance. The other one was constructed in 2005, and the planner that issued the building permit for that didn't interpret the zoning ordinance correctly, and the building was allowed to be constructed. In this, I also sent the request off to the county, the assistant highway superintendent for the county, and they have expressed their concern that a 50-foot setback is ideal. They have indicated that when this road, when County Highway 104 is reconstructed, that a 100-foot right-of-way would be ideal and probably obtained. Right now, there's an 80-foot right-of-way there. So they would acquire an additional 20 feet of right-of-way, and typically that's 10 feet on each side of the road. So with that, and I will preface this by saying we don't know when that road, when that county highway would be reconstructed. It could be 30 years or 40 years, but eventually it could be reconstructed or other improvements made to the interstate interchange. So with identifying now what the request is, the Board of Adjustment, which you are acting as, should not, and this is very clear, the ordinance says you shall not vary the ordinance regulations unless you make some findings, and the findings are as follows. And I've indicated those in the staff report. There's about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items that you are to consider. One, are there particular physical reasons why the applicant cannot meet the setback requirement? For example, is there a creek? Is there rock outcroppings? Is it so steep that they need to move it, or it needs to be a smaller setback? This parcel is relatively flat, so there is no particular physical hardship which would preclude the applicant from meeting that setback. The second item, the second consideration, are there conditions upon which the applicant or the application for a variance is based on which would not be typically applicable generally to other properties in the area? So in this case, the 50-foot setback is found all along major arterials and not just to this property. So it is a uniform application of that requirement of a 50-foot setback. The third is granting the variance, will that be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to other properties or improvements in the area in which the property is located? In this situation, granting the variance could result in some direct or potential direct harm to the public. Placing a building closer to a well-traveled county highway increases the likelihood that a vehicle could leave the driving surface and crash into the proposed building. Furthermore, placing the building in the proposed setback could have future impacts to the usefulness of that road and the longevity of the road. Potential issues could arise when the county highway is reconstructed, and issues are compounded on this site because it's at the intersection of a county highway and an interstate interchange. So that would complicate the placement of buildings even more in that setback. The fourth one is the proposed variance is not unreasonably impair the amount of light to the adjacent properties. It won't cause congestion on public streets. It won't increase the danger of fire or impair or diminish the property values in the area. It's unlikely that the proposed building would have any effect on the light or the air circulation of the adjacent properties. And it also is unlikely that another accessory building would increase the traffic from this farmstead onto the county highway department. So, and also furthermore, it's unlikely that a decreased setback would impact the property values of the area. So that item has been addressed. And then the fifth item, is there circumstances or conditions where there is no possibility that the property can be developed if there is strict conformity to the zoning ordinance? That is to say, is there reasonable use of the property? This property, the subject property, is over 7 acres in size. The applicant also owns the property directly to the west and to the south, and those properties could be utilized to construct this building. You can already see on the air photo that there are a number of grain bins that have already been placed on the property to the west. So there is reasonable use, staff finds that there is reasonable use of that 7-acre parcel. And lastly, we are to consider that if the variance were authorized, that it would be the minimum variance amount that would allow for reasonable use of that property. And that if there are any modifications that should be made, the applicant has attempted to reduce the impact by moving the building as far south as he feels can be accommodated. And should the variance be granted, the zoning board of adjustment may wish to consider asking the applicant to sign a waiver of a right to protest any future right-of-way acquisitions or improvements for when the highway is reconstructed. This would bind him or any future property owners to at least acknowledging that the building was granted a variance and potentially would need to be moved or altered to allow for reconstruction of the county highway. So in reviewing the aspects of the criteria that are set forth in the zoning ordinance, it's staff's opinion that the applicant cannot make a case for a variance. The property owner has full and reasonable use of the property, and staff also finds that the applicant could relocate that proposed structure on other areas on the 7 acres that he owns, or on property further to the south or to the west, which he also owns. So staff is recommending denial of the variance request to reduce the front yard setback from 50 feet to 23 feet. And I'll go through a couple of pictures that I have that will show So this is the site plan. The darker square shows the building that is being proposed. This is basically stand on the very edge of the west edge of the interstate, looking at straight west down County Highway 104. The trailer business is on the north side. Mr. Brown's farmstead is on the south side, and you can see the one building is already there, and I have some closer up pictures. The red building is the one that was there. The white building was the one that was allowed to be constructed in 2005. This shows you approximately, how it would line up with the highway and the ditch. The white building is approximately 23 feet off, I believe 23 feet off the setback.
No, the white one is 13 feet.
13 feet, sorry.
The one I want to do is 23.
Okay. So the building that the applicant is requesting, or the setback, would be 10 feet further south than the white building. And this is the area in which the applicant is, you can see the west edge of the white building on the very corner of the picture there. So this is on the west, this is on the west side of the red building looking towards the interstate, and how close that red building already is to the setback. And this is standing in the driveway of the applicant's property. Now this is looking straight west, and as the applicant indicated, it's about 13 feet from the property line to the edge of the white building. And once again, this is where the applicant wants to build that building. This is the trailer company that's across the street. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. This shows the ownership of the area around. You can see that the Brown family owns the property to the south and the west generally. So I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have. The applicant is here, and I know that he would like to, has some items to show on the Elmo, so we will need to get that pulled up for you when he is ready for that. But I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Scott?
One question.
Go ahead.
We have one question at Del Rapids, if we could answer, or if we could ask.
Sure, go ahead. State who you are.
Again, this is Virgil Klein, and my question is, I know I see the picture here. If the highway is reconstructed, what would happen with these other two buildings? Would the owner be required to tear them down, or would the county just have to work around those?
Well, there are a couple of options. It's my understanding that they would enter into some kind of, the highway department would enter into negotiations with the property owner, and they would potentially come to a mutual agreement. And it's hard to say what that mutual agreement would be right now. It may be that they would have to buy the buildings completely. They may agree to move them, but they would enter into some kind of negotiations and they would come to an agreement.
Any other questions for Scott? Yes, not at this time. Is the petitioner here? Will you please come forward, state your name and address?
Can I take my mask off to talk here?
Sure.
Hi there, my name is Todd Brown. I live on the proposed site. I have 4 other people here. Ray Brown, my dad, Lois Brown, my mom, Eric Brown, my son, and Mitchell Brown, my son. Family farm. I've lived there my entire life for 55 years. My folks moved on there back in '63 and have been there. And I guess I appreciate you guys' time. I appreciate Jeff coming up and visit with me, but I truly don't feel I have another option for this building. And I do feel like we're already next to the highway. We've gotten along since 2005 on the big one, since probably back in the mid-'70s on the red shed that he's talked about. My house is 35 feet away from the fence, so inside of the variance. So we've got a good history of being inside of this variance and having no issues with anything. So I do have a couple pictures I'd like to set up here if we could get this to run, just kind of, I think it would make it a little easier for me to explain. There we go. Okay, this, I do not, for you guys in Dell's, I'm looking at the picture that's got the big blue building on it. But it's not the scale, but the idea here is a 80-foot wide by 140-foot long. It has 2 doors in it, one on the east end and one on the west end. They're 24-foot wide, 17 tall. I've tried to kind of box in what a semi would look like with 2 trailers hooked up to it, sitting there. Hence the reason why I need to have a drive-through. Farmers I've talked to, it seems like ultimately as they grow, they turn into double trailers. And so I want to accommodate this building so that when we get to that, the red boxes on there would represent like stalls like you'd see at a car dealership or at a John Deere dealership, pieces of equipment that need to be worked on, and the workbench would be on the north side of the building. And so basically accommodating equipment to get in and around this while the semi is still sitting there and be able to still be a useful building. So consequently, I don't feel like I can skinny up the building or get it further away from the highway because of the size that I need it to be useful for the farm that we have. This next picture is basically, and I don't, these are not the scale by any means. They're just to try to give you an idea where it's at. And you guys in Dell's, this is the second picture I give Justin, but basically laying there, the first thing is we are 10 feet further away from the fence than the building that's right there. We're going to be 12 or 13 feet to the west of the building that's there. It accommodates the farm for multiple reasons, but one, 400 feet away from the house. It is going to be my shop. The west door back over here is kind of tractor and feeder wagon. Feeding the cattle is this area here, okay? Coming in here is basically for the farm use, for the tractors and stuff. And it isn't represented in this picture real well, but up by the house, there's the existing farm place with all the buildings, a lot of maintenance, a lot of tools, a lot of running and getting things to fix. As you can see, the grain bins to the west, a lot of maintenance and stuff. So a farm shop, tools, everything, it needs to be located handy. I mean, it's going to be, aside from the house, it will be the most used building on the property. And so for that reason, I feel this is the only location that it can fit on. Now, we'll talk about, I think Scott or somebody brought up maybe moving it to the west and setting it here. And I don't know if you can see these structures here, but we're planning another bin and a dump pit for a grain and a leg and stuff. And if I got the permit for that, that's going to be built this summer or whatever. But to move this building to the west and then try to move it 27 more feet to the south would interfere with this dump pit. And then about up at the top of that screen where you see Highway 104 is where there's a culvert going under the highway. So basically from the west side of this building until you get just about to that west driveway or this west property line, there's literally a 7 or 8 foot drop in the lay of the land to a culvert where it drains and goes to the north side of the highway there. So I didn't feel like it would work there any way, shape, or form and without interfering with water flow and trying to address a lot bigger concerns. So I've kind of thought this through. We've been planning this for a long time, like 5 years, and this is just where I think it needs to be on my farm and how I need to make it to fit my operation. I guess I got the same, I don't know, Scott's narrative of things. I guess I'd like to address a few things if I could kind of go through them paragraph by paragraph with you guys. Scott give you reasons why maybe you shouldn't be giving it. The first paragraph, I've got them listed, and this is the staff analysis. The first paragraph, I just wanted to make clear that if I do get this variance granted, that we have the right size building. It is an 80 by 140 building. It's stated in here, and Scott told you that it's clerk. The next paragraph talks about the 2005 building maybe being set there in an error. I don't know, Scott did try to explain to me a little bit what ordinance or Article 13-03 has to do with a number of your frontage, basically, if you've got a bunch of buildings there. But what I remember is before this building was here, there was an existing building, and it was that close to the highway, and that's why we got it. The red building that's closer to the house, that's right next to the fence, has been there for 40-some plus years or whatever. There was a building there before also that was probably in that same, at least that close to the fence. I don't know if we needed a permit. Dad would have done that one. The third one is, let me see here. Why does it need to be there, I guess, is it's the center of the farm, I guess, is what I'm trying to state there. The fourth paragraph, so the last paragraph on page 1, talks about the highway and wanting more. I'd like to say that the white building's been there since 2005. The other one's been there a lot longer than that. They talk about snow flying from a snowplow or something like that. It might be just the way their routes are, but I've noticed that snowplows aren't going very fast by my place, and I think it's because somewhere right north of this building, we go from the DOT, from there east into Dell Rapids, and from this building to the west is probably the county. And so they're turning around in my driveways. So they're not going very fast blading snow. I did get this information before the last snowstorm, and I realized it was wet, heavy snow, and so I thought, how far are they winging this snow? Is it getting close to any of my buildings? And this wet, heavy stuff didn't get halfway to the fence on any piece of the property. 2 reasons. One, like I stated, the snowplows are not going very fast anyway because they're virtually done or starting their route. So they didn't like they're going by at 60 miles an hour. So I kind of like to think that that addresses that, and then the fact that this new building is going to actually be 10 more feet further away from that building. The black, on the top of page 2, the black heading there, is it a hardship? Why is it a hardship? Well, it's my building, it's my shop, it's the most used building. It needs to be convenient, it needs to be handy. If it can't be handy, there's really no reason why I want it on this farm or whatever, if I can't have easy access to it, because I will be using it all the time. The next one, Article B there or whatever, is talking about this 50-foot setback is pretty common in the county, along county highways, except for on my farm. The 50-foot setback, I've got 3 buildings that are inside of it right now, and they've been there for a long time, and we haven't had an issue with anything. So the fact that there is a variance is a good thing and everything, but the one building, like I said, has been there 50-some years. There's never been an accident. I don't know if there will be, and hit it. The other one is far enough away or whatever there. Then Article C there talks about crashing into the building. Like I said, we haven't seen that or whatever. We went through some discussion with DOT. They just redid this interchange on the interstate 2 years ago. They widened the road. They reshaped the ditch. There really isn't a turning lane there. It talks about maybe wanting to have a turning lane there, but there's 3 lanes of a highway there. The middle one is not being used, is kind of double white lined off or whatever, but ultimately there's 3 lanes there or whatever. And in living there a long time, there's so much activity right there with the interstate, with the buildings, with the trailer. People aren't going by there at 55 miles an hour, even though that's the speed limit. It's just it's very active, and so for that reason, I don't know if people are careful. They're definitely alert when they go by there. D there, I don't really need to address that. We're not doing anything that's going to stir up more activity on and off of the road. E, it talks about, we have 7 acres, and we have a lot of property that we own the whole quarter or whatever, my folks do or whatever. The first thing I want to talk to is to go south. Along this south side here, there's a cattle sorting pen or lane that's there that accesses from the interstate pasture to the corral, and then from the feed yards to the west, all the way back up to the corral. So let's just say I was going to put it straight south in this area. Somehow we'd have to figure out a way to take all the equipment and get it through, open gates or do something, and cattle that are coming and going and we're sorting and stuff like that, we'd have to try to address that. Then the other one would be clear to the west, which is off the side of this property or this picture. The shed, I think, needs to be a drive-through shed for the growth of what I think is coming with our semis. And in order for me to put it out there, first of all, the security of it, it's 1,100 feet away from my house, and there is another driveway right there, so I don't know how we secure it and make sure nobody else is kind of using it when we're not. And then the site development to try to make maybe a gravel approach so a semi could drive out the back of it and turn around and come back in. I mean, it's a hardship in the site preparation, but ultimately the building's not in the usable spot of where the farm needs it anyway, so it's just not really a workable spot for me. The top of page 3, I've moved it as far south as I can. I've got the building the size that it as small as I think it can be and still be useful for me. I don't envision that I'm going to ever wish that I built my shop smaller. I'm assuming that it's going to probably always wish that we did it bigger, so I've tried to get it as far away from the road and not encumber my feed yards and still be useful for the farm. And I've already addressed the last paragraph, which that we do have more acres, but in my opinion, they're not suitable for this building. And I guess with that, I'd answer any of your questions. I would ask if somebody does something later, if I could maybe redirect or something too, if there's somebody else that's going to stand up and talk.
Madam Chair, can I ask?
Go ahead, Adam.
How far, what's the distance you think between the shop and your feed yard? What do you think the estimated,
It's going to be about 30 feet,
30 foot
30
between them?
foot, yeah,
Okay.
yep.
I guess the other question I had too, what do you plan on using for your heating source, propane,
Yeah,
electric?
propane, yep.
Where would you put your propane tank at on there?
Not 100% sure, but in my, oh, that ain't gonna come up. But anyway, just like on the west side of the building there, we plan on, there's a grove of trees where it's at. We plan on tearing out more trees than just what the building needs. So there's gonna be a little bit of a staging area there to the west side or whatever.
Any other questions for him?
Madam Chair?
Jeff?
Jeff Barth here, for the Dell Rapids people. So, you know, it's going to cost a lot of money to widen this road if it, and when it ever does happen. What do you think you would have to get to move those existing buildings to the east, to move them 10 foot south, like you're proposing this new building? In other words, when the time comes, all of these buildings are at different things. You know, we did have to buy some land to reroute on Highway 137 going south by that one church. I think that cost us, the highway department, something like $200,000. And my concern is that by allowing more buildings to be in too close to the road, that I'm basically writing a huge expense to some future commission on the highway. So what about the idea of moving some of your other buildings to the south as a compromise, like the existing building that's snuggled up? What about the idea of setting aside a sum of money that would make it easier for a future transaction to happen? I'm just thinking into the future here, and you know, if it may not always be a quiet corner there, it might be a Holiday Inn or something, and across the street, for example. What are your thoughts?
I don't know. The first thing I would say is the white building that's there, if you wanted that one moved south, the cement for the building that I'm proposing, which is bigger, is $100,000. So I'm assuming we'd be spending a fair amount of money to re-cement, because the building that's there is fully cemented already.
Right.
Or whatever. The next thing is if you've noticed, I'm kind of right straight west with a door. So if you move that building, then the new building needs to be moved that much further south, because I'm driving by that building to get into the door on the other, and the door is only 24 foot wide at this time, so
It's a tight spot.
very tight. I really wouldn't want to kind of get into what them costs are. I know they're a lot. What is kind of interesting is we had a lot of this discussion with DOT when they just did this, when they were preparing for this interstate interchange. And at that time, for them, this is the interstate. It wasn't useful to move a building or to do anything. They were able to work it, and I think by Scott's pictures, the ditch, yeah, it isn't as wide as the interstate ditch is, but it's wide enough. It handles the snow. Yeah, I just, I'm trying to envision, in the event that the building that I'm proposing is gonna be further away, that one's gonna be a problem. It's costing a lot to do something with the buildings that are already there. And I'm gonna venture to say that if the buildings that are there that are in the way, ultimately my house is in the way. And then we're talking a lot of money. And so I'm not gonna say that the road needs to change its plans. I'm just saying that the farm has been there, has always been there. I'm trying to get as far away as I can and still have a building that I can use that's helpful in the future. And how the road has to deal with that, we just got done doing it a couple of years ago and it worked out fine. I would find it hard to believe that the county wants to have a wider road than the interstate did for turning lane and for getting into the interstate.
Anyone else have any questions for him?
We don't have any questions in Del Rapids.
Okay, thank you. I guess not at this time.
Okay,
We may call you back.
okay. So should I go sit down, is it?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
please.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to speak to this item? David, is there any hands raised at all?
No hands are raised.
Thank you. There's no one else who wishes to speak to this item at this time?
Madam Chair.
Jeff?
Jeff here again. Our acting superintendent of highways is here, and I wonder if he might have a comment.
Please come forward and state your name and address.
My name is Shannon Schultz. I am the acting highway superintendent, also formerly known as the assistant highway superintendent. My working address is 2124 East 60th Street. That's where the county highway building is. Scott Anderson did a good job summarizing some of the issues that the highway department has. And number one, it's fairly close. Highway ditches serve a purpose for snow storage as well as water conveyance. And as close as that white one is, and to think this one will be 10 feet certainly is a concern. Also, what Scott Anderson said is the existing right-of-way is 40 feet on that side, and standard highways are 100 feet of right-of-way, which would be 50 feet per side. And so when that time comes, the boundary would shift 10 feet to the south, and so that 23-foot variance becomes a 13-foot variance, which is kind of a concern of ours long-term. Mr. Barth also pointed out that by allowing this to happen, when the time comes when Highway 104 does need to be reconstructed, it will be very expensive for the highway department as well as the county highway taxpayers, which are basically user fees for licenses and wheel taxes, to have that negotiation. We're not going to treat them unfairly by any means. We want to make them whole, and so that means you treat them fairly. And if those buildings need to be removed and replaced, that's, you heard the $100,000 feature from the landowner for one piece of concrete slab, times that by 2 or 3 to move all of those, and that's a pretty expensive thing. So Mr. Barth invited me to share my mind, and so I'll just say, well then, shift the road to the north, right? So now you're impacting sort of unfairly another property owner by instead of getting 10 feet, now you're getting 20 feet to the north only. And at the same time, you're introducing 2 horizontal curves at an interchange ramp. Very dangerous. So those are the reasons that the highway department does not support the variance as well. Mr. Barth, did I address your thoughts?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll have, if anybody has questions, I'll stick
Any
around.
questions for him? Guess not.
Mr. Brown has a question? Or comment?
Will you keep,
You
you please
you
come
have to
forward?
come to the microphone because this is actually broadcast.
I guess my question for it's Shannon, right? Yep. Okay, is, I already have 2 existing buildings, so you're thinking that you probably would want to move those before you would do something with the road, all right? How far do you think you'd have to move them? Is what are you going to go to the full 50-foot setback? I would assume if you're going to move a building, you're going to go 50 foot. You're talking about my house, you're talking about my shed, and another shed. I'm trying to impose on here that I don't want to get closer to the highway. I want to give you as much room as I can. I feel like the issue is going to be stuff that's already there, and I already think that those buildings that are there impose the problem on this situation, not the one that I'm building. It might add to it, I would agree, it will add, but I think what we found when the interstate or the DOT was there is there's ways to work around that. Maybe safety isn't 100% perfect the way we'd like it, but them buildings and that road can work together where they're at and do everything just fine, in my opinion. And I still like to state that I've lived there my whole life. I've dealt with all the snow removal. I've dealt with that intersection. I've watched and listened to the traffic there. And so I truly feel like that road can have as much work done to it as it needs to. It might not meet all of the nice, I don't know, the wanted type setbacks, but this building is not gonna pose any more of a problem than what's already there. And I don't look at the ones that are there as being a problem. If I had to pick and choose, my farm would be, 150, 200 feet south of that highway, and I'd have a grove of trees there to protect me or whatever, but I didn't get to pick that. This farm has been there. I've just tried to grow with it, and the road or the highway and I have been able to get along very, very easily and very fine and with no conflicts. And I believe we can do that going forward, even if they do decide to make that road wider and deal with it. Thank you.
Anybody else care to speak to this item? I'm going to close the floor then. Commissioners?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Mike.
I'm really struggling with this one because I am sympathetic to the fact of the usability of why Mr. Brown's pointed out that this is really an ideal location for the functionality of his farm and for this building. However, I struggle with granting a variance because we really are setting a precedence. And I recognize that he does have structures there that are well within that setback currently, but I don't think the precedence was set by granting a variance. It was just history over time. So I guess with that said, I guess I'd make a motion to deny.
I have a motion.
Madam Chair,
Doug?
Doug Odie here. I'd second that. I can sympathize with the Browns. Our farm, it's on a county road, all got redone this past summer. And we had things there forever too, and they got destroyed, so I sympathize with you, but I think we have to abide by what the rules are stating, so, there.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to deny variance 2101. Any further discussion?
I don't want to vote.
Well, you're first. Roll call vote. Jeff Barth,
Aye.
Adam Morhauser,
Aye.
Doug Odie, Mike Ralston,
Aye.
and I will let you know Becky Randall has recused herself. Bonnie Duffy, aye. The item has been denied on the county side. Del Rapids?
Well, I guess it doesn't matter at this point, but I would have made the motion to approve, just because the farm has been there forever. It's been there since before the interstate. And, I think a precedent has already been set by the other building being there. So I would make a motion that we'd approve. Just a second.
I'll second that motion. Motion is second, roll call vote. Klein. Yes. Huff. No. Ludens.
No.
Schwebach.
Yes.
Requiring a two-thirds majority vote, the motion has failed.
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Jeff?
I just would ask Scott if there's an alternative for the Brown family at this point. So in our normal processes, it gets appealed to the county commission. but there's must be another step that can be taken by the Brown family.
The next appeal step would be to a circuit court.
Okay.
If there's that, or they can relocate the building, they could come back. You know, they always could come back with another variance request for a different amount, but we would go through the same process, and I think that you've sort of indicated you'd like to have a 50-foot setback, so I don't know if that is warranted, but if they wish to appeal, then it would need to go to circuit court, and that would need to be filed within 21 days.
Thank you, Scott.
Okay, there's no old business. I see no new business. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved on the county side, Jeff Barth.
I'll second that.
Motion's made and seconded to adjourn. We have a roll call vote. Jeff Barth,
Aye.
Adam Moorhauser,
Aye.
Doug Odie,
Aye.
Mike Ralston,
Aye.
Becky Randall.
Motion to adjourn. Second by Tom Ludens. Or Steve Hawk. Yeah.
Roll call vote. Klein. Yes. Huff.
Yes.
Udens.
Yes.
Schwebach.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you for your time, Connie. Thank you for accommodating the ability to do this on Zoom this evening.
Thank you.